Hello, I'm Florida State University President John Thrasher. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Institute of Politics Celebrating Civility Speaker Series. It's a great honor to have Senator Angus King join us for another important conversation about the future of American politics. Senator King just doesn't talk about the need for greater bipartisan dialogue. He does something about it. As the State of Maine's first independent U.S. Senator, he works hard every day to bring Republicans and Democrats together to find common sense solutions to address the challenges that face our nation. He's a proven consensus builder who puts civility and respect ahead of political ideology. Whether that means taking part in small working groups that bridge partisan divides or inviting his colleagues on both sides of the aisle to his home for barbecue dinners. He's committed to building relationships that often lay the foundation for successful legislation. From his previous experience as Governor of Maine, as well as meeting people during family camping trips, in their RV, or riding his Harley across the state, Senator King knows that most Americans are tired of the partisan bickering. They want civility in the political process, and they want to see results. We're all looking forward to hearing from Senator King, so I'm going to ask Institute of Politics Director Hans Hassell to get the discussion started.
Well, thank you, President Thrasher. Thank you, Senator King, for being here. We really appreciate you taking the time out of what I know is a busy schedule to meet with us and chat with us a little bit this evening. I want to, before we begin here, I want to introduce some of the excellent students we have as part of the IOP, and they're really going to be driving this conversation. And I want to give them a brief opportunity to introduce themselves. And then I'll begin by asking a question, and then I'll turn it over to them, and they'll pretty much run the rest of the show here until we have to conclude. So Ashley, do you want to go first? We'll go in that order and just briefly introduce yourself and so that the Senator knows who you are.
Hi, Senator. My name is Ashley. I am originally from Tampa, Florida, and I served as the graduate assistant this past year for the IOP.
Great.
Hi, I'm Dylan Bezertny. I just graduated on Friday with a Bachelor of Science in Political Science. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Good morning, Senator. I'm Jason Kowalski. I'm from Fort Myers, Florida. I'm a first-year student at Florida State, and I'm studying political science.
Good morning, Senator. I'm Andrew Flaxman. I'm from Jupiter, Florida, and I am a double majoring in history and political science.
Hello, Senator. I'm Ryan Welch. I live in Ormond Beach, Florida, and I'm a political science major and second-year student.
Great. Well, thanks, Senator. The Institute of Politics.
Hans, the first things I have to say, when I took political science in college, we very deliberately, our department was called government. And the head of the department was once asked, why is it government, not political science? He said, because there's no science in politics.
Well, we're trying to change that, trying to make this a little more systematic, I think, in some way.
There you go.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Senator. We're really glad to have you here. You have a long history in politics. You've served as Governor of Maine back in the 90s and early 2000s, and are now serve as the senator from the state of Maine. Part of the kind of the Institute of Politics is really focused on public service, and one of the questions we wanted to lead off with was what drew you to public service, and why do you think that it's important?
Well, my career in public service started with my first job out of law school, which was with the National Legal Services Program, which is law for low-income people. And I was assigned to Maine. I grew up in Virginia. I'm not from Maine, which is a matter of some consternation to some of my political opponents, but I've been there for over 50 years. That doesn't mean I'm from Maine. I can't claim it. But in any case, my first real job was in public service. It was serving low-income people in a very rural area of Maine. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I think the sort of origin of my interest in broader public service was the realization when my clients came to see me that they had problems that were this big. And the legal problem that they had was this big. And I could deal with their legal problem, but they also had problems involving education, healthcare, dental healthcare, mental health, transportation, domestic relations, you name it. And so now in politics, in government, I'm more able to deal with that broad range of what makes people gives people difficulty in dealing with the day-to-day vicissitudes of life. The basic idea is you want to do some good, and and this is an opportunity. Politics is one opportunity, not the only one. You can provide great service as an administrator, as a social worker, as a worker with individual people, as a teacher. Incredible influence teachers have. So there are lots of ways to serve. And I guess the trigger for my running for governor back in 1994 was a concern about Maine's future. Maine was having a very difficult time. We were losing jobs. We had very bitter politics between the two parties. And I was a business guy and thought that perhaps I could make a contribution by trying to solve problems rather than fight about, who's up and who's down. And that was the way I approached it as an independent governor for 2 terms. So that's sort of the history, starting when I first left law school. Then I worked in the private sector. I did work for 2.5 years in the U.S. Senate as a staff member, which was terrific experience. Then went back to Maine, private law practice, business, public broadcasting, a lot of different things, and then ran for governor. My first run for public office was for governor in 1994. I never served in the legislature or city council or anything like that. So that's a little bit of the history.
Hi, Senator. So you're notable because you're not a Republican or a Democrat, but you've run at every election as an independent. Why have you chosen to avoid party affiliation in your public service?
Well, I'm a great believer that all of us are always smarter than any of us, and that ideas, that there's no such thing as a monopoly on good ideas or good proposals. That's number one. Number two, I've observed that political infighting often gets in the way of problem solving. Finally, somewhat ideologically, as a business guy running for governor in 1994, I was not entirely comfortable with the agenda of the Democratic Party, particularly as it regarded regulation and some areas of taxation. On the other hand, I wasn't comfortable with the conservative social policies of many of the Republicans in terms of things like the rights of gay and lesbian people and abortion rights. So I really wasn't fully comfortable either place, and decided to try to make a run down the middle. I used to say that my political philosophy, which you could put on a bumper sticker, was I call them as I see them. I try to make the best decisions I can that I think will serve the public in the best way. Now, I am a member of the Democratic caucus in the Senate. When you're a senator, even if you're an independent, you have to join one of the other caucuses in order to get appointments to committees and develop some seniority. So I had to make a choice. And basically, the Democrats, back when I first came in 2013, committed to respecting my independence, which they've done, and provide me opportunities to grow in seniority and responsibility, which has also happened. I'm now the chair of 2 significant subcommittees on 2 different committees, and am but what's important is to be a member of the Democratic caucus. I didn't have to become a Democrat. I didn't have to sign any pledge or any such thing. I have found that it's a luxury to be able to not have to, stand at attention for the party agenda or the party supporters and groups and money sources. It's sort of liberating, and that's just been who I am for 25 or 30 years, and it seems to have worked. And I hope that I can make the other piece as being an independent. And the reason I ran for the Senate, when I left as governor in 2002, I had no intention of running for office again, ever. That was just not part of what I do. My wife and I bought a big RV, took our kids out of school. We did a nationwide 5.5-month circumnavigation to the US in the RV. And then I did boards, and I actually taught at 2 colleges and a variety of other things. In 2012, our Senator, Olympia Snowe, Republican, resigned abruptly or retired, announced her retirement. And she basically said, I'm retiring because the Senate is hopeless. It doesn't work. It's hopelessly partisan. We can't get anything done. And I've just sort of had it. I said, okay, I'm an independent. Maybe I can do some good in this terribly partisan atmosphere and do some bridge building and to try to help get things done. I've been able to accomplish that in some cases, not in others. There's no secret. It's not a very kumbaya atmosphere around here right now, but I remain committed to trying to solve problems rather than score points for the party.
Senator King, you've highlighted the importance of what you called eloquent listening as a way for people to address the concerns of those that voted for Trump in 2020 and to improve our society in general with the increasing partisan divide. Could you explain what eloquent listening means to you, why people aren't engaged in it enough, and also how we can encourage people to do more of it?
Well, I think that the Democrats have to understand that 75 million people voted for Donald Trump. That's a lot of people. We've got to try to understand one another. We can't just talk past each other or act like, one of the big problems in politics today is we don't have opponents, we have enemies. And you don't care about listening to your enemies. You don't care about understanding your enemies or what's motivating them. I think that we have to listen, particularly to the people that voted for Donald Trump and that are alienated from our system, in order to try to understand, what's going on, what's motivating them, why did they take this step, and by the way, people on the right ought to try to listen a little bit to Joe Biden and quit trying to act like he's some kind of wild-eyed socialist, which he isn't. But I could go on for quite a while. I am a U.S. Senator after all, but part of the real problem in the country right now is we're divided into separate realities where people choose their information sources according to their pre-existing opinions. There's actually a term for that. You may have learned it in one of your classes, confirmation bias. And it's the natural human tendency to seek out information sources that agrees with where you already are. And the result of that, with the balkanization of the news business, where you have MSNBC and Fox and One America and CNN, people tend to go to where they already feel comfortable, and their biases are simply reinforced, and that divides us. I've found in public policy over my career that if you have general agreement on the facts, sitting around a table, you can solve pretty much any problem. And usually the solution is almost self-evident. When you don't have agreement on the facts, it's almost impossible to solve the problem. For example, in immigration, if you hear immigration and you think murderers, rapists, people spreading disease and taking our jobs, that's one view of immigration and reality. The other is DACA students, teachers of the year, doctors, immigrants contributing to our society. But if you have two people walking in the room with those two worldviews, it's very hard to reach a policy solution. So that's why I think we've got to listen. We also have to become better consumers of information. We need to seek out different sources of information so that we're not pushed down the rabbit hole. As you know, the algorithm on Facebook and other places is once you click on something and they think that's what you want, they're going to give you more of it. for some reason, for example, my Apple News feed thinks I'm interested in the Dallas Cowboys. I don't care about the Dallas Cowboys, but I always get something because I must have clicked on a story about Dak Prescott's contract or something. But the forces of our society are literally driving us apart. And the only way to bridge that, it seems to me, is A, education, to make us better consumers of more discerning consumers of information, and B, listening to one another and trying to understand. So that's what I mean by that term, eloquent listening. Every now, one of the terms I hate is people say, I hear what you're saying. Yeah, of course you hear it. The question is, are you listening to it and trying to understand it and identify with it? Why do people feel this way? What is driving it? And are there ways that we can bridge the gap?
Senator, thank you for being here again. There's been a lot of discussion about whether the Senate should abolish the filibuster, given the obstructionism. You recently wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post about how the filibuster is only tenable if the 60-vote threshold is used sparingly on major issues or used in good faith efforts to leverage concessions rather than to simply obstruct. And it doesn't really seem like we're moving in that direction. Do you see any hope that Republicans or Democrats in future Congresses might use the filibuster more sparingly? And what can we do to encourage the use of the filibuster in good faith?
Well, I'm more optimistic. And I've talked about the media a lot. One of the problems is the media only reports conflict. We passed a bill, for example, dealing with Asian American hate crimes last Thursday, 94-1 in the Senate. You may have heard about it, but it wasn't a big deal on the news. What you hear about is, Republicans criticize Biden infrastructure plan and all that. In other words, the emphasis is on the conflict and what we're not accomplishing, when in reality, we are getting some significant things done. Now, I can't promise, but I know, for example, Cory Booker and Tim Scott are working on a policing reform measure together. I don't know if they're going to make it. There's some difficult issues, but that would be a big deal. If we can do a police reform bill on a bipartisan basis, that would be a big deal. Most of the CARES Act funding the COVID funding was done on a bipartisan basis until the one in January, when we couldn't reach consensus, and the Democrats did it on a straight, what they call reconciliation, which bypasses the 60-vote threshold. So the answer to your question and my question, frankly, will come in the next several months as to whether we're able to bring bills to the floor that should be bipartisan and get bipartisan votes. If Mitch McConnell exercises, ironclad control over his caucus, and we're going to stop this, we're going to give no Republican votes, whether it's some issues on gun safety or immigration or DACA, or there are areas where we ought to be able to get bipartisan support. If we can't, and if it's pure obstruction, if it's, we're going to just obstruct whatever Joe Biden wants to do, then people like myself, who are very reluctant to change the filibuster because it's a protection for the minority. And right now, the Republicans are using it, but the tables could turn in 2 or 4 or 6 years, and the Democrats would be damn glad that they had a protection from a simple majority. So I'm very reluctant to change it because of the danger of losing the shield. On the other hand, I can't sit by and just say, okay, I'm going to draw my salary down here, but we're not going to do anything because Mitch McConnell is saying no to everything. So I think the real test you're going to be watching over the next several months will be whether we're able to reach some good faith bipartisan work on some of these matters. That's the crucial test for me. But this filibuster thing is very complicated. I had a meeting with 2 people that know a lot about it yesterday afternoon. Once it's gone, it's gone. Once it goes away, then it's gone forever. And the next time you have a Republican president and a Republican Senate, Republican House, the Democrats are going to wish they had the filibuster to slow down what the policies that they don't like. So that's I see a glimmer of hope, but I'm not I'm a perennial optimist, but I'm not betting the ranch on it. But I think we have some opportunities.
So kind of based off that question with the filibuster, many believe that our political institutions aren't able to function today with the hyperpartisan gridlock. And I'm sure you see that on a daily basis in Congress. So how have you tried to overcome these barriers to create bipartisan legislation? And are there any institutional reforms that you think are necessary or could encourage more bipartisanship?
Well, I'm going to start my answer by something that I don't think I've ever heard taught in a political science class. The schedule of the Senate militates against bipartisanship. Here's the way the Senate schedule works. Our first vote of the week is Monday afternoon about 5. Our last vote of the week is Thursday afternoon, usually about 1 or 1:30. The result of that, plus good air transportation, now that it's starting to reopen after COVID, but generally, I'm talking pre-COVID and hopefully post-COVID, everybody goes home every weekend. So we're only here Monday night, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday morning. If you think about that, and we're working when we're here, there's no opportunity for nonpartisan hanging out. We literally don't know each other. And you can't solve difficult, complex problems without some level of trust, and you can't develop trust without relationships. I worked here, as I may have mentioned, 40 years ago as a staff member. In those days, all the senators lived in Washington. Their families were here, and they went home to their states maybe once every 5 or 6 weeks, but they were here, and they were here on weekends. They got to know each other. They hung out together. They had barbecues and, that kind of thing. And that's just not true at all today. So after I saw this and was here about a year, I embarked upon my own little project of about every 6 weeks, and this was stalled for the last year during COVID, but before that, and I'm going to start soon again, I would invite, or my office would invite, 4 or 5 senators to my little house. I've got a small house on Capitol Hill, and I'd go to Kenny's Smokehouse and pick up ribs, beans, and coleslaw, and we would just talk, just hang out, and always bipartisan. And I've had everyone from Ted Cruz and Mitch McConnell to Chuck Schumer and Elizabeth Warren. I mean, how's that for a spread? And not at the same time, by the way, but it's always a bipartisan group, just to try to break down this lack of relationships. That's it's an odd thing that, the schedule could, something as mechanical as the schedule, but in my view, that really is undermining our ability to get things done. So that's one thing that I think if I were in charge, I would say, let's work straight through for 4 weeks and go home for a week. People want to go home. Our constituents want us to be there. They want to see us, and we want to visit businesses and hospitals and schools, but our job is to be here. So that's one institutional change. Another institutional change is to get rid of the gerrymander. That doesn't affect the Senate, but it profoundly affects the House. And what happens is, if you have a gerrymander district that is basically all Republican or all Democratic or majority, the primary becomes the election. The primary becomes the critical election. If you're in the panhandle of Texas, where it's Republican plus 26, and you get the Republican nomination, you're going to be the congressman. But then the question is, and this is a good political science question, is who votes in primaries? Mostly the activists of either party. So the tendency is to pull the people to the edges. You're not going to get a moderate winning a Republican primary in the panhandle of Texas. I mean, the panhandle of Florida. If I said Texas, I meant Florida, because it's the people who control the primary are, I suspect, are Trump, conservative Republicans. Same thing goes for a gerrymandered Democratic district somewhere else in the country, and that will tend to move the candidates to the left. Now, here's the final point I want to make, and I think this is one of the most serious problems facing us right now. In these situations, in a state that's mostly red or mostly blue, you can lose your election You can lose your primary, not because of your position on abortion or guns or gay rights or immigration, but because you are viewed as someone who's willing to listen to the other side and try to solve problems. You can actually lose because they'll say, he wants to go up there and compromise. That's a disaster for the country because you have to have compromise. You can't solve any major problem, any human problem, without some level of compromise. But if compromise itself is an executable offense, then people are going to come up here with their armor on, and they're not going to want to enter into problem-solving negotiations. It's a really serious problem. It's one I've never seen before in American politics, where just the act of being reasonable is enough to cost you your seat. I'll end with this. I had dinner some years ago with a very conservative senator who was about to have to run again, and he was facing a primary. And I said, man, how are they going to get to your right? You're the most conservative guy here. What are they going to charge you with? And without missing a beat, he said, they're going to charge me with being reasonable. Well, if you think about the implications of that structurally, that's a really serious problem. And it also gets back to what I mentioned about the Senate and the Congress are polarized because the country's polarized. And you've got these people, 60, 70% of Republicans believe that the election was stolen from Donald Trump. Even though there are no facts to support that anywhere in the country, that's what they believe. And so that leads to this kind of polarization in the Congress, because if a newly elected Republican senator comes here from a solid red state and gets a reputation for solving problems and compromising and trying to get things done, they'll face a primary challenge and probably be defeated. So those are some sort of mechanical parts that I think are really hurting our ability to solve problems. Sorry to go on for so long, but you ask an important question.
Hi, Senator. Thank you again for speaking with us today. What advice do you have for students who have aspirations for public service?
My advice is a little unconventional based on my own experience. My advice is take your time and don't be in a hurry. Well, I have 5 kids. I'm full of advice. My kids will tell you that, that they've started to number my pieces of advice. Oh yeah, Dad, that's number 17A. But anyway, one of the best pieces of advice I got when I was a student was, don't feel any pressure to move vertically until you're 30. Move horizontally, try things, learn things. That's number one. Number two, if you're interested in politics and public service, don't feel that you have to do it right away. You have to run for the town council when you're 24. I've seen so many young people do that. They may get elected, they may not, but they're sort of burned out and they lose a couple of elections, and then it's tough to win an election, and they're frozen out of the system at the age of 30. As I mentioned, I didn't ever run for anything until I was 50. And there were some advantages to that. One is I worked in the private sector and was able to make some money. Having some money in the bank helps if you're going to try to run for office. Number two, I had a variety of experiences. If you think about it, politics and government consists of making the rules for the rest of us. That's what a law is. It's a rule. Doesn't it make sense that the people making the rules have played the game? I working as a business guy, learning about how to work with the Department of Environmental Protection, or how to get permits and all of those kinds of things. I used to say when I ran for governor of Maine, I'm the only candidate for governor of Maine who's ever gotten a permit from the DEP. And it helps if you've had those real life experiences when you're going to turn around and start making the rules for everybody else. So my advice is, have a dream of public service, but don't feel that you have to realize that dream in the first 5 years after you're out of school. Have a variety of experiences, try things in the public sector, in the private sector. And by the way, you can serve. You don't have to be in politics to serve. I mean, there are no more important people in our society than our teachers, for example. And I've often thought, I mean, I've had 5 kids go through public schools. We have better teachers than we deserve. The teachers are wonderful people, and we don't pay them enough, and they're not recognized enough. But, you know, that's a significant public service. You're going to influence people. Nobody knows who won the World Series, you know, in 2002. I know that the Red Sox won it in 2004, but other than that, I don't know. But everybody remembers their 5th grade teacher, or their freshman English teacher, or their high school chemistry teacher. I mean, teachers have a profound influence. So there are lots of ways to serve. It doesn't have to be politics. So those are some thoughts. On the other hand, politics is a way to serve a lot of people in important ways.
Well, thank you, Senator, so much for spending this little time with us. We really appreciate it, and your insights into how we can be more civil and be engaged in all of this. So you definitely live it and are a very good example of that sort of philosophy. So thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you, Hans. Great pleasure. Good questions. I enjoyed being with you. Have a good end of the year.
All right. Thank you so much, Senator. Have a good
See you later.